So today's Torah portion is about Israel in the land, and Vayeshuev, and comes from Genesis 37 through 40, and he dwelt. So let's start with a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this Torah portion. We thank you for your hand that we see not only in the prophetic life of Jacob and of Joseph, but also in your word, the prophecy word that we see today and seeing come true in our very day. In Yeshua's name. Amen. So Sandy made a good point there. It literally means, when you look at it literally, it means to sit down when you look at the word. And so, of course, it comes from this, 37:1, and Jacob dwelt in the land of his father, sojourning in the land of Canaan. It was interesting, meaning sit in a chair. I met a guy one day when I was driving trucks delivering stuff to the port, and I had to wait for them to unload and all that, but I also had a mandatory hour break I had to take. So there was a long pier right next to the port, and I would walk out on the pier, and I noticed there was a guy that was always there. We got to kind of know each other, and I got to talking to him. He's always sitting in a chair. And me and this young guy was there one day talking to him, and he's talking about spiritual stuff, very biblically knowledgeable. And so we're kind of both on this young jitterbug, as we called him, who, trying to figure out, he's about 15, and he's trying to figure out, what to do in the world and how he fits and how to avoid the gangs and all the stuff. In part of town where he lives right there by the port, and that's generally not the best area of town. And so we talked for a while, and he's going to show me the tricks for fishing there. He said, I'm going to show you how to catch fish in this place. And so we're talking to this guy, and I'm noticing he has a little garden cart that he pulls out there, a nice little wagon, got his cooler in it, got his rods and reels in it, got, like this is a fishing machine. But I'm across the pier there, and he's like there at the drum set, and I'm noticing around that tires on the garden cart, there's like dirt, like lots of dirt where it's blown up there. And it's like, I don't remember a lot of wind today, maybe. And I started looking, and some of the dirt next to the wheel actually has little plants growing in it. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And so we walked on out on the pier. He said, okay, it's almost time for the tide's fixing to start. They're fixing to start biting. Come on, watch me catch some fish. And so I walked out with him, and I said, I'm looking at this guy's cart. I said, it looked like it hasn't been moved in a while. How long has he been sitting there in that chair? He said, oh, him? He'd been there for 13 years. And he dwelt on the pier. I was like, seriously? I was like, oh my goodness. But amazing guy and amazing story. But that's a picture of when you sit down and just make yourself, this is my home, And he literally lived, and not that he wasn't capable, very capable, has all kind of even certifications and stuff, that he'd worked in, and just nope, this is what he was choosing to do at this point in his life. Like, just spend time here on the pier with the Lord and don't let anybody mess with me. Okay. Jacob is a little different story. Jacob is going back into the land of his fathers. He had ran away, we know the story, going back to the land of Canaan. He had been up in the north there, Padan Aram, and he's traveling back down to the land of Canaan. Of course, this goes all the way back. That's supposed to be a picture of Abraham, although we don't really know what Abraham looks like. Could be Joseph, could be Jacob, could be anybody. But that's what generally they look like. Interesting coat, speaking of coats. But he's making his way back down there. And so I want to look at a little background so we understand where this is coming from, just so we remember where we're at. In Genesis 32, Jacob says, God of my father Abraham and of my father Isaac, Yahweh, who said to me, he's praying, he's reminding God, he's like, you told me, return to your country and to your relatives, and I will do you good. So please deliver me from Esau. Like, I'm scared of him. So this is like, and so he gets up that night, he takes his wife and his servants and his sons over the fjord of the Yebach, which pours into the Jordan River. We're going to look at lots of maps today so you see where this stuff is. And of course, he's left alone, you know the story. And he wrestles with the man till the breaking of day. And this man, who turns out to, he names the place, face of God, man tells him, as he realizes its divinity, he says, your name will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have fought with God, or struggled with God, or wrestled with God. That word means all those things. And with men, Jacob. Don't worry about Esau. You've wrestled with men too. You fought with men and have prevailed. That's a prophetic statement. And so he took that as, I can do this, basically. Esau said, let's take our journey and let's go, and I will go before you. And so Esau, he meets his brother. You know, he bowed down before him. You know all the story. And he tells Esau, it's like, you know what, we've met. It's cool. You know, you go ahead. My children are young. Joseph, by the way, when this is all going on, is estimated to be, his little son Joseph is about 6 years old. He said, my children are young, they're tender, and my flocks, you know, they're young. I can't drive them too hard, you know. So he's like, so Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. It's all really important to understand the big picture. This, believe it or not, everything going on here is prophetic. Bible tells us in Genesis 36 that Esau lived in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. Don't forget that. That's critical. Esau is Edom. So when you hear Edom, that's Esau. So we know who we're talking about, okay? Jacob then travels south. He travels down to a place called Sukkot. And of course, when you first see that, you go, Sukkot, Egypt. No, not that Sukkot, different Sukkot. There's actually several of them. He travels to Sukkot, builds himself a house there, makes shelters for his livestock, and he purchased the parcel of ground where he spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Okay? There's a lot of, we could talk about what that means, 100 pieces of money. It's a lot of money, okay? It's pieces of silver, but it's a valuable pieces of silver. So the point here is that he didn't steal it. He didn't take it by trickery. He bought it. Okay, he owns it. And he put an altar there, and he called it El Elohi Israel, the mighty one, the God of Israel is basically what it's saying. The mighty one, the God of Israel. So where is that? We're going to look at that. One of the things I want to point out before I leave this is that we have throughout Scripture recorded evidence where the fathers of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, purchased the land of Israel from the native peoples. They bought it. Abraham bought Hebron in Genesis 23. In 2 Samuel, David bought the Temple Mount, which was in a threshing floor. You remember that story, the Jebusite threshing floor, right? And here we got in Genesis 33, Jacob buys this land in Canaan. He buys Shechem. He buys the land there. Now, here's an interesting thing. Recently, it was realized that they were researching the documents in Israel and realized that the state of Israel does not claim the Temple Mount as their property. Or there's all of this is our property, this is ours, this is ours. So they don't claim it as state-owned property, period, meaning that it's privately owned. So they started, well, who actually owns it? Now that's sort of an interesting thing. The Jordanian Waqif, it's called, is in charge of the Temple Mount. They take care of it, but they have no legal claim, nor do they claim ownership. Although Jordan, well, we have it because it was ours, and when the British were here, and the British took it, and they gave it to them, and they have no legal documents supporting a claim to the Temple Mount. This gets more interesting as it goes on. What the Waqif just has is a temporary, as does Jordan, just a temporary mandate to run it. If it's a matter of power, Israel actually took it in the 67 war, right? And gave it, it's like, here, you guys can run it, right? So Jordan has no legal documentation of ownership. And so it doesn't seem like anybody has, other than we go back in the Bible and we see that the descendants of David owned it. Now, here's a map so you can see I jotted in this red line from roughly where Jacob was coming down, and he comes down to Sukkot, which is here along the Jordan River. This is the Yebach River coming in from over to the east, pours into it, and there's actually a well-known fjord there in ancient times. And you see Sukkot, but across from that, on the other side, in the green there, if you can read it, is Shechem. So he first landed at this Sukkot and then went over to the place Shechem. Joshua chapter 13 tells us that Sukkot is part of the land ascribed to the tribe of Gad. There's actually another Sukkot on the west side near here that's on the west side, and some people get that confused. But we know he's coming down. He's actually coming down the east side because of where he's coming from. Okay, so that's where he is. In Genesis 33:17, we see that Jacob crosses the Jordan into the Canaan. So and that's when he goes to Shechem and dwells there. Now, so he's buying that piece of land. We see Jerusalem down at the bottom of the map, very bottom. One of the last things there, Jerusalem or Jebus or Shalim, or whichever name it was going by, depending on the time period. We know David bought that. So if nobody else owns it, then who does own it? It brings up this guy, which is an interesting thing. Has to do with Bible prophecy in our days. There's been a recent lawsuit put forth by direct descendants of King David claiming legal ownership to the Temple Mount. This guy, along with his partner, and that had put together this corporation to a legal entity called Wings of, course it's in Hebrew, but Wings of Eagles for the Assembly. Okay? And they are preparing to present this claim to the Knesset in Israel. And he and his friend actually have documentation of their legal descendancy, their legal family tree, all the way back to King David. So one of the things they're doing, of course, is like we made this. He said we made this Wings of Eagle for the Assembly, and allowing anybody who can show that they're a physical descendant of King David, males, through male descendancy, biblical. Notice they're not doing anything rabbinic. Through male descendancy, that they can join and be part of that, part of that claim. This is what they say, picture of the Temple Mount in the background. Of course, it's not supposed to have any green trees on it, but Muslims don't care about that. It says, we're claiming that King David purchased the Temple Mount and passed it on in succession to his all-male descendants, and that they have never sold the property to anyone. So they're making this claim. And ultimately, their goal is a project to facilitate the building of the third temple. And it was sort of interesting, some of the stuff they were saying. It's like, yeah, but, and of course there's a huge debate about where the temple is actually supposed to be. Some say to the south of the Dome of the Rock. Some say at the Dome of the Rock. Some say to the north of the Dome of the Rock. I'm kind of in the north of the Dome of the Rock, but who knows? But what's interesting, these guys have gone so far as that we've already got two companies that actually can move the Dome of the Rock if we need to. They're talking about there's two companies in the world that say they can pick it up and move it without damaging it. And since it's actually not a mosque, this is where it's interesting. They don't claim that it's a mosque. They said since it's not a mosque, there's no problem with moving it. Well, it'll be a huge project. I'd love to see that, but anyway. Israel 2017. This is an Israeli archaeologist. Says very early Islamic coins found in the past month bearing menorahs and Arabic inscriptions join Islamic pottery shards from last year, which they also found last year, with menorahs on them, demonstrating early Islam's recognition of Jerusalem's Jewish history. One shard from a mosque in Hebron has the quote on it, Holy Temple, which is interesting because it's a term that's never used for the Dome of the Rock. They call it something else in Arabic. They don't call it the Holy Temple. So it's interesting what this is demonstrating. It was a group of 1,300-year-old coins, and they're stamped with these quotes on them and these menorahs on them. And it's demonstrating that early Islam acknowledged the temple, They acknowledged the Temple Mount and actually didn't see themselves so much in rebellion. That's actually a really modern thing. It's a really modern thing. They saw themselves as kind of a continuation. That's why they were putting this on their coins, a menorah, and mentioning the Holy Temple. They were trying to be a continuation of what the Jews hadn't been doing there and Israel had been doing there. And so it's interesting that the Hebrew University there is now preparing a display of Islamic artifacts that demonstrate from very earliest Islamic times that Islam acknowledged Judah was there and that it wasn't a Jewish temple, as an Israeli temple, as opposed to like the modern drama. Oh, they've never been here. We've always been here. It's like, oh, come on. No archaeologist, no real historian believes that. But, politics. Now, December 6, 2000, I'm saying there's a lot of stuff going on right now. December 6, 2017, in recognition of President Trump's announcement in the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, this combination flag was actually displayed on the walls of Jerusalem's old city. That's the old city in the background, the old stone walls there, so it looks sort of like that, only they're real. In addition, over 250 rabbis signed a letter of thanks to our president. And this is part of what it said. It says, you have a rare privilege, Mr. President, to be the first president to spearhead the recognition of Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the state of Israel. It goes on, it says, we merit living in a generation in which prophecies are being fulfilled one after the other. So it's not just us that's seeing this over in the West. They see it there. These are Orthodox rabbis writing this. Said the presidents of America merited standing by Israel in actualizing the prophecy of the return to Zion and the building of the state of Israel. And it concluded, we are sure that you will be remembered in the history of the Jewish people forever as one who stood at the forefront and was not afraid. May God's promise to Joshua be fulfilled upon you. So, neat stuff. So Jacob, when he comes down, these just fold together, watch. Jacob comes in peace to the city of Shechem. He didn't come there in war. He didn't come in battle. He came in peace. He bought, the land, and he lived there. He came in peace to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. And when he came from Padan Aram, and he pitched his tent in front of the city. And he bought the piece of land where his tent was, and at the hand of his son of Hamor. So it's all documented there that he bought it. And he erected there an altar, and he called it El, the mighty one, the God of Israel. The prophetic significance of these verses of Jacob, remember who Jacob is. Jacob is this flesh man who comes, makes an altar, and says this altar is to the God of Jacob? No, the God of Israel. Now, isn't that interesting? Jacob calling Yahweh the God of Israel, but calling himself Jacob. I think we're sort of all there, because we see ourselves as flesh man, but we know God sees us as spirit, right? And so, that's interesting. So, this is after, of course, he has split away from his brother Esau, who's in the land of Seir. He has struggled with God. He has had his name changed. He has come there representing an entire nation of people. In flesh, Jacob, but also in spirit, Israel. So he came there, if you think about who he was, about what he did, and he's representing this nation called Israel, one who struggles with God. And, he grabs hold of God. He doesn't let go, no matter what. If you think about it, he left Canaan as Jacob, but he returned as Israel. And in our day, Israel has returned again to the land, just like it's prophesied in the Bible. This is again where he ended up going. Sukkot over on the right, Mount Ebal on the left. And then Esau, where did he go? He went, it says, to the land of Seir. That's further south. It's actually way off the bottom of this map. We see at the very bottom, Jerusalem, and just the top of the Dead Sea. We're going to go down below the Dead Sea. I switched to Google Earth map because I just thought it was kind of interesting. We have the Dead Sea. There's the body of water you see there next to the red outline. Red outline is called West Bank. Apparently somebody has invented a country called West Bank, which is not mentioned anywhere in Scripture. And Jerusalem's just kind of right there in it. I think y'all can see that. It was interesting because President Trump said basically all he was doing was just facing the reality. I think one of the things we need to face is either this river has two banks or it doesn't have a bank. I mean, if we've got West Bank, where's East Bank? Okay, I mean, whose land is it anyway? That's what this comes down to. Whose land is it? By the way, the place that he bought is inside of this. So, and as all the places that they're claiming over there today, we got biblical, with the Temple Mount, Shechem, and Hebron. Those places are all that Islam is saying, the Arabs are saying, oh, these are ours. We've got ancient documentation where they were purchased from the native peoples, okay, that were there. Of course, in this hypothetical place, West Bank doesn't have a capital or a history, but it's politically correct to call it West Bank for some weird reason, even though we don't call the other side East Bank. The Jordan River is unique in that aspect. It's the only river in the world to have one bank. Do you remember where Jordan went? I mean, where Jordan went? Well, Jordan goes south. Where Esau went. He goes to Mount Seir. That's down here on the bottom of the map. On the east side, maybe that's East Bank. But you see the little red arrow there on the bottom. That's Mount Seir, okay? It's down there's kind of a valley, there's a wadi that runs down there. Arava. It's called the Arava Valley. It runs down there from the Dead Sea. It goes all the way to the Gulf of Aqaba. We're just north of the Gulf of Aqaba, near Petra, not too far from Petra. Jacob dwelt in the land of his father, sojourning in the land of Canaan. That's the American Standard Version, very literal translation, so literal sometimes that they thought it was necessary to make the New American Standard. Based on that, the American Standard is so literal, it's kind of hard to say. So this is a very literal translation. What would some of the modern translations, how would they translate this? Where do you suppose Jacob dwelt? Did he dwell in the land of his father, sojourning? That's a pretty powerful statement, right? He come in and sat down in the land of his father's travels. Like he's making a statement, this is my land. This is the International Standard Version. Jacob continued to live in the land they were occupying, where his father had journeyed in the territory of Canaan. So I just wanted to show you how political correctness can even invade your Bible translation. Okay, and I've told you many times, I don't care what translation you use, just know what your translator's biases, thoughts, purpose, what's his purpose, okay? This is kind of weird you kind of have to know what you're reading because, today we have a liberal, politically correct word, which is an interesting phrase in itself because in reality, political history is supposed to be the reality. So political history of Israel is very real, but they deny it. The political correct crowd denies it. So that actually makes political correctness politically incorrect. And that's just another trick of the devil. Think about it. He twists words. That's what he does, right? Okay? And the whole world then goes around and says that, with the exception of our president, of course, and us, says that Israel is occupied by these Israelis. Like, what? It's not occupied by the Palestinians who aren't really a people. They're actually Jordanians and they don't have a history or capital. They've never actually been a people or there's no there's no Palestinian history, there's no Palestinian language, but they're not occupying Israel. The Israelis are occupying Israel. This is strange. Okay? It's the way the enemy works. The reality is that the Palestinians are a people who really don't exist as a people. They're Jordanian occupiers, and most likely descendants of Amalek, who are the descendants of Esau. Okay? So, anyway, be careful of what your translations are. Jacob came in peace. They don't come in peace. So that tells you the difference. We have a little different map here just so you can see a bigger picture. Shechem here is circled in blue. Jerusalem is underneath it, underlined in black, just off the edge of the Dead Sea there. What else? Oh, yes, down at the bottom. Down on the right side here we have Ammon, Moab. In red we have Ammon, Moab, and Edom. That's the Ammonites and the Moabites, descendants of Lot's daughters through incest, and the Edomites. Now, ultimately, Edom is who? Esau. Okay. Ultimately, these lines marry within each other, create all kind of havoc, but we already know that Esau's already married into the Ishmaelites. We will get to that in just a second. So those groups start to mix. Genesis 37, these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, a son of 17 years, was feeding the flock with his brothers. How old did I say he was when they left? He was like 6. Okay. And so that's how they were when he starts to come into the land, and he sat down in Shechem for about 11 years, it looks like, before this happens. Okay. So he's living there. He was living there in peace. Seems like everything's going fine. Now he's 17 years old. Joseph is 17 years old. Goes out. He's a youth. And he brings a bad report to the father. Now, at 17, he's about as intelligent as he will ever be. He will be this smart for another couple of years. And then his intelligence will start to shift into wisdom. Okay? And there's a huge difference between those two. He will learn that you don't do things like this. You know, you don't just go out there to your older brother and say, guess what they're doing? So Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was a son of old age to him, and he made him a robe reaching to the soles of his feet. Okay? That's the literal translation of the Bible, LITV. I like that translation. It's really good. The coat of many colors, she talked about that. I won't go into it. Language, culture, context. And so when we look at it, what is it? It really, if you think about it, it's like a royal robe. And that's interesting because Joseph, we know, ends up being a type and shadow of Messiah. So his father puts on him a royal robe. This is going to get more interesting as we go on. But just keep that in mind. So it's important that we understand what this actually is. His brothers saw that the father loved him more than his brothers, and they hated him. And they were not able to speak to him in peace. And Joseph dreamed a dream. And does he keep it to himself? Oh, no, not at 17. Because it's a good dream. And they hated him all the more about the dream. And he said to them, you got to hear this dream I've dreamed. You're just going to love it. We were binding sheaves in the middle of the field, and my sheaf rolled up, and it stood up, and behold, your sheaves came, and they bowed down to me. I was like, oh, yes, they're excited about that. It's like, so what are you, little this is his older brother. What are you, little guy? You going to reign over us? Are you going to rule over us? It's like, and they hated him more because of his words and because of the dream. He dreamed another dream, and of course, this time he knew to keep it quiet. No, it says he told his brother, he said, behold, I've had another dream. And even the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing themselves to me. And he told it to his father, who also wasn't very impressed. Says he rebuked him. He said, what are you saying? Are you saying, am I going to bow down to you? Are your mother and your brothers going to bow down to you? His brothers envied him. This is interesting. Here's where you see wisdom kick in. Because Jacob has had some experience with God, and he's like this. He's had 2 dreams in a row. See, this is how prophecy works. I dreamed this dream, and and it was about tomato sauce and water. Okay, this dream, he has 2 parallel dreams that are different, but the same theme, the same outline. 2 totally different backgrounds, but So the father's hearing this, Israel's hearing this, and he's like, and it says, and they struggle with translating this verse. Someone says, listen to it, remembered it, paid attention to it. In other words, he rebuked Joseph about bragging, basically, but he paid attention to what he said. It's like, this is interesting. You're going to have to keep, one version actually says, keep this in mind. So after this, Joseph goes out, he comes back, and he's coming out to his brothers again. And of course they're, oh, hey, bro, come on, man. Now they see him coming, and they start plotting to kill him. Now think about this as a type and shadow of Messiah. When Messiah's with his brothers, they're like all excited that he's hearing from God, aren't they? Not really. Not really at all. And what do? In the quiet, in the dark, in the background, they start plotting to kill Yeshua, don't they? They start plotting his demise, just like these brothers do to Joseph. And they said, each one talking, it's like, behold, the master of dreams is coming. Okay, here's Mr. Dreamer. Let's kill him. We'll throw him in one of these pits out here. Nobody's ever going to know it. We'll say something evil's happened to him, some beast. We'll see what happens to his dreams. That sounds like, what are we going to do with this troublemaker? That's what they say about Yeshua. It's like, let's just get rid of him. Let's just get rid of him because he's causing too much problems. Too many problems. Reuben hears it and he delivers him from the hands. Let's don't kill him. Let's don't shed blood. Let's throw him in this pit in the desert, but let's don't kill him. You know, he's thinking that he might be able to somehow save him later. It's like, I don't want to get involved in the murder of my brother. I mean, come on. Now, Reuben, of course, is the firstborn, right? He's a physical firstborn, so he's doing what he's supposed to do at this point. He's standing up for the family. And it says, and it happened when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off the robe, that sounds familiar, which was on him, and the long robe reaching to his feet. It's like, this is one of those words like there's a word like this in Hebrew, and it takes half a sentence to translate it. Okay? But it is picture of Yeshua when he was taken captive by his brothers on the Mount of Olives. And of course, he had on a long robe before his crucifixion, and they took it off and the Roman soldiers cast lots for it. So they took him and they threw him into the pit. There's no water in it. They threw him down in there. And they just sat down like everything's good. And they sat down and they eat. And they looked, and there's a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. And Judah said, come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let's don't let our hand be on him. Let's don't kill him. He is our brother, our flesh, and his brothers listened to him. Okay. Again, this is prophetic. Judah ultimately becomes the spiritual leader of the tribes of Israel once Reuben and Levi had disqualified themselves, and then Judah becomes a spiritual leader. Well, Reuben had disqualified himself, and Judah becomes a spiritual leader. Okay. And so they listen to him. And the prophetic significance of this is interesting too, because when you think about what it is, Judah here is actually rejecting his brother Joseph, who's a type and shadow of Messiah. And what is he wanting to do with him? He's wanting to give him to foreigners. Let's let the foreigners have him. Yeah, he's hearing from God. Yeah, he's, who knows. But let's just, these guys don't even speak the language. They're not even going to say his name right. They'll probably call him by something else. They'll probably put a J on his name or something. And so what ends up happening, the story, they end up taking him to a foreign land. And in the foreign land, who does Joseph become? He rises to the status of Lord and Master. Just like Yeshua was rejected by Judah, cast to the nations, the foreigners, who called him by another name, but yet recognized who he was and raised him to the status of Lord and Master. It's interesting. The men were Midianite traders. They passed and they took him up out of the pit. They sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph. And of course, Yeshua was exchanged for pieces of silver. We could do a whole, and I have done a whole thing on the types and shadows of Joseph and Yeshua. But today I'm looking at a different picture, a bigger picture, okay? Reuben came back to the pit, and Joseph was not in the pit. So he missed part of this. And he returned to this, like, he's gone. He's gone. And where am I going to go? I can't, and he's thinking, I can't go back to my father and tell him, where did he go? Where did he go? Where are the Midianites from? Well, first of all, the Midianites I had to zoom way out now. We got the Dead Sea up at the top. You see Moab, okay? And down below Moab, Edom. Edom is Esau, right? Go on down. near the Gulf of Aqaba, which is off one of the fingers of the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Suez, and Egypt's over to the left, Sinai Peninsula in the middle. And anybody want to guess what the land of Midian is called today? It's called Arabia, Saudi Arabia, okay? You know that. So this is Saudi Arabia. On the eastern shore of the Gulf of Aqaba, Jordan comes in and joins it there. It's Jordan and Saudi Arabia connect right at the tip there. And so according to the book of Genesis, the Midianites are descendants of a person called Midian, who is a son of Abraham and his wife Keturah. It describes that. And we see that in this story today, and the descendants of Ishmael joined them. And again, this intermarrying, if we could do the whole family tree here, is the source of Amalek and the Amalekites. Here's a more modern map. Ignore the travels. I'm going to show you why that doesn't work in a short bit. So today they occupy an area that's called Saudi Arabia. That's where they would have been. Now, it wasn't all of Arabia. Saudi Arabia is huge, but they were just along the sea there in that mountain range. Okay. Now, this, on all your Bible maps, Egypt is over here. On all your maps, it's going to show this as the Sinai Peninsula, and they'll show Mount Sinai down here on the bottom. Actually, this map does that. So they travel down there. It says Mount Sinai right on the bottom. I just picked a map because I needed the map, not the... Galatians 4:25 clarifies it. It says Mount Sinai is in Arabia. That's where it is. And they cross the Red Sea, and we do that in another Torah portion. But that's where it is. The Bible, we don't have to guess. This stuff's all in the Bible. It's really strange that as focused as people were in earlier times, getting a lot of details right, how they miss stuff like this, I really don't know. Because it's all right here in the Bible. You don't have to guess what's going on. So they took Joseph's tunic, and they killed a kid of the goats, and they dipped the tunic in blood. And they sent the tunic, reached to the soles of his feet, and they brought it to his father, Israel. Okay? And they said to his father, do you know whether or not this is your son's coat? What's the prophetic significance of that? Do you know your son, Israel? What are they asking him? Israel, do you recognize the blood of your son on a garment that you made for him? This is prophecy. This is prophecy. Proverbs 30 says, who has ascended up into heaven and who has descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fist? Who has bound the waters in his garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name? And what is his son's name? Do you know? Surely you know. Come on, Israel, you know who this is. You know who your son is. You know whose blood that is. You see the picture? See, today, Genesis 37:33, and it says, and Israel knew who it was. This is my son's tunic. Today, young people in Israel are recognizing Messiah. They're recognizing Yeshua's blood as their Messiah in numbers not recorded for the last 2,000 years. Okay? And why not? They've been in the land for 70 years. 77, 70, 700, those are the numbers of what? Completion of a time. Okay? So a cycle has completed, and all of a sudden, we're praising and worshiping with Judah in Israel, singing the same songs about Messiah they're singing in downtown Jerusalem. Right? We couldn't do that 10 years ago. Okay? This is in our day, in our time. 70 years in the land. Prophetic significance. Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, I will go down into the grave to my son in mourning. And his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt. Okay, so like Joseph, physical Israel went into captivity. The northern 10 tribes were captured by the Assyrians over a period of 15 or 20 years from about 740 BC to 722 BC. And the story is told in the Bible, book of 2 Kings. It's also in Chronicles. But God told us also through the prophets, especially the prophet Ezekiel, what would happen in the last days after this. So Egypt, of course, represents the world, the sons of Israel being scattered into the world, and that really happened with the northern tribes being scattered. Our Haftarah portion today comes from Ezekiel 36, and it's about the restoration of Israel. Ezekiel 36, read the whole chapter sometime, it's awesome. I've just got a few highlights today. So you, O son of man, talking to Ezekiel, prophesy to Israel's mountains and say to the mountains of Israel, hear the word of Yahweh. The enemy has spoken against you, saying, everlasting heights have become a possession to us. Okay? Mountains of Israel, hear the word of Yahweh. And the cities that are forsaken, which become prey and mockery to the rest of the nations all around. Ezekiel, God is telling Ezekiel to prophesy to what? To the land. He's not prophesying to people. He's talking to the land itself. He's talking to the mountains, the cities. And it goes on, actually, in the full version, it says in the valleys and the hills and the da-da-da-da-da-da. It goes through just describing everything. He's giving a prophecy to the land of Israel. Okay? In the fire of my jealousy, I've spoken against the rest of the nations and against all Edom who have given my land to themselves for a possession, with all joy in their heart, with scorning soul, to make it an open land for prey. A spiritual prey, maybe? Think about it. What's happened to the land of Israel? They didn't go anywhere with it. It's still there. But what's happened to it? It's become destroyed because of the spirituality that's being portrayed there, that's being manifest there. Okay? Straight from the enemy. And so the land is not producing. It won't produce. And the interesting, like all the way back in the Balfour Declaration, when they were trying to figure out what to do with the land, what to do with the Jews, it's like, might as well give them Israel. Nobody's ever been able to grow anything there except for the Jews. It's just a desert wasteland. Nobody else even wants it, for goodness sake. And by the way, if you see pictures of the Temple Mount, which is supposed to be all this big place in their history, I've got pictures of it around late 1800s, around the turn of the century, 1890, 1900. There's tumbleweeds blowing around on the place. They don't care anything about it. Trees, weeds growing everywhere. They don't care anything about it. Okay. But once Judah got interested in, oh no, this is like, all of a sudden it was interesting. Okay. So, and again, remember who Edom is. This is Esau. So God here is prophesying to the land against Edom, the Edomites, Esau, descendants of Esau. Okay. Jacob's brother, Israel's brother. This is all just like, this is a big family thing about chosen and not chosen. Blessed and not blessing. Do you want the blessing? Do you want Yahweh's blessing, or do you not want to reject it, mock it? Okay? And so it really, when we look at these prophecies, it starts to give us real significant understanding of what's going on in the world today. You, O mountains of Israel, you shall put out your branches and yield your fruit to my people Israel, for they have drawn near to come. So Yahweh's saying they're going to come back. They're getting close. They're going to come back. For behold, I am with you, and you shall be tilled and sown. So God is saying he is with the land. Again, he's talking to the land. This is significant. God's speaking to the land, speaking life to the land itself, the land of Israel. And I will multiply men on you and the house of Israel and all of it. And the cities shall have people, and the waste shall be rebuilt. Okay, now we have to remember what happened to Joseph. He's been taken into Egypt. He marries someone there in the nations. He has children by a Egyptian wife, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so these brothers, these offsprings of Joseph, okay, who are representing the offsprings and the lost people of Israel, are now mixed with the nations. But Israel adopts them fully as his own sons, even though they're not. So all of a sudden this ceases to be about DNA. Okay? So it sounds like DNA and all, but when you look, it's not. It's about Israel and who it is. And so the northern 10 tribes did basically the same thing. They went into captivity eventually wandered out of the pages of Bible. I believe wandered into the early pages of European history as the nomadic tribes from the south. And Judah ultimately goes into captivity in 586 BC in Babylon. Were released, built the second temple, only to be destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And the Edomites and the Ishmaelites ultimately took over the land after the Romans left. Okay? And now they deny that Judah and Israel have ever even been there. That's all a myth. There were no Jews here. Not here. Nope. Over there somewhere. I don't know. Not here. But God has another plan. Look at this prophecy. Ezekiel chapter 20. Say to them, so says Adonai Yahweh, in the day that I chose Israel and lifted up my hand to the seed of the house of Jacob. So you're talking about the seed, the offspring, Joseph and the tribes, right? Lifted up my hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which is a picture of the nations, out of the land of Egypt into a land that I searched out for them, flowing with milk and with honey. And I said to them, let each man throw away the abominations of his eyes and don't defile yourself with the idols of the nations, with Egypt. I am Yahweh your God. I just wanted you to see the parallels here. I gave them my statutes. I gave them my ordinances, which if a man does, he will have life in them. It's about life. It's about blessing. Moreover, I also gave them my Sabbath to be a sign that they might know that I'm Yahweh that sanctifies them. But the house of Israel rebelled against me. They didn't walk in my statutes. They rejected my ordinances, and they greatly profaned my Sabbaths. Now, the next portion is the scattering, the consequences of that rebellion. Ezekiel chapter 20 is just this whole long story of this. Moreover, I swore to them in the wilderness, I will scatter you among the nations and disperse you throughout the countries. And did he do it? Yeah. Because they had not executed my ordinance, but had rejected my statutes, profaned my Sabbaths, and their eyes were after their fathers' idols. And so what did they do? Then they mixed pagan worship into Yahweh's worship. That's the next thing he describes here. When you offer gifts, when you make your sons pass through the fire, do you pollute yourself with the idols to this day? Should I be inquired of by you, O house of Israel? Like, you're going to pray to me? You're going to ask me what to do when you're doing this garbage? He said, as I live, says Adonai Yahweh, I will not be inquired of by you. That which comes into your mind will not be at all. And when you say, we will be as the nations, as the families of the countries, we'll serve wood and stone. I'll have fun with that. That's what he's saying. Yeah. So this picture comes as part of Jacob's sheep talking and sorting from Laban's sheep. He says, I will bring you out of the peoples and will gather you out of all the countries where you're scattered with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with wrath poured out. And I will bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and there I will enter judgment with you face to face. Okay? So Yahweh marks us for separations out of the nations. Okay? And the judgment is going to take place face to face. Who is the face of God? Jacob wrestled with somebody and named it face of God. It's a physical being who is divinity. We call him Yeshua. So the judgment is going to be, do you know him? The judgment in the wilderness. Notice they're not in Israel. They're in the wilderness. Still in the wilderness when this prophecy is in the wilderness, in the land, in the wilderness of the people. So they're not out somewhere. They're in the wilderness of the people. They're in the nations, but we're separate in the nations. And the question is, do you know him? Same question Israel had. This is your son. Do you know him? Do you recognize the blood? And that's the same question that we have today. Our judgment is based on, do you know him? Do you recognize the blood of the Son? Okay? Face to face. That's the Christian experience. It's a picture here of the Christian experience, I believe. That's what it's prophesying. But then comes another sifting, another sorting, and it's based on Jacob's sheep again. It says, I will cause you to pass under the rod, this is after the last one, and then bring you into the bond of the covenant. And I will purge out from among you the rebels and those who disobey me. So the covenant is about obedience, and now there's a separation from those who know him to those who obey him. And I will bring them out of the land. See, you were in the land of the people, not anymore. I will bring them out of the land where they live, but they shall not enter into the land of Israel. So Yahweh does this sorting and purging, and it's really interesting text. The rebels are separated, brought out from the nations, and these, I'm guessing, are people who are not accepting Torah or not accepting Messiah, but they don't enter the land of Israel because of rebellion, because they refuse the covenant of Israel. They don't walk in its blessings. They're separated out now. They're separated out from the heathen nations where they live. It almost sounds like they're, maybe prophetically, you might say they're saved, but they're not walking in the covenant. I don't know. Just keep going. And then it talks about the restoration specifically of Israel, the people called Israel. Verse 40, for in my holy mountain there is all the house of Israel, all of them. This is the whole house of Israel. This is not just Judah. It's not the southern tribes, the northern tribes. This is the whole house of Israel, all the tribes, all of them. They shall serve me in the land. There I will accept them. I will accept you as a pleasant aroma when I bring you out from the peoples and gather you out of the countries where you have been scattered. And you will know that I am Yahweh when I bring you into the land of Israel. I can't tell you the prophetic significance of what we saw happen this week. Even though it was originally a United Nations resolution that, in conjunction with Great Britain, who was controlling the land of Palestine at the time, who declared Israel as an independent Jewish state. Those same organizations this week, the United Nations, which has constantly been speaking against Israel, and Great Britain, who was instrumental. They owned the land. They controlled it for years at the time. They're the ones that set this whole thing up. Now they've turned against them. Now that they've done it, they're against them. There's a reason for that. God is showing the world that those people and their power, Great Britain, who at the time, the sun never sets on the British Empire, that's where we were. They didn't do this. Let them turn against them now. The United Nations, it passed a resolution. They didn't do this. Let them turn against them now. See what happens. You're going to see who controls the land of Israel. He's already told you. He controls it. So even the nations that created it have turned against it, and it's going forward, not backwards. Okay. By the way, it's really bad for those nations when they turn against Israel. That's never a good thing because you end up on the wrong side. Okay. No, Yahweh, they were just a hand that Yahweh used. He can use anybody. He can use anything. He can use a donkey. Okay. And so prophecy is to show us. People get real caught up into prophecy like, okay, this happened, so this and this and this and this and this are about to happen. Don't even go there. Prophecy is to show you where you are right now. God's not worried about your future. He's got the future. We shouldn't be worried about it either, right? He's to show you where we are right now. So between the scattering, I just showed you a bunch of texts about the scattering and the regathering, right? I left one out. And between those two, right in the middle, just before the regathering, there's another prophecy, and I left it out. And it's a fascinating text. And it's for our day. Ezekiel 20, verse 28. It said they saw every high hill, the Capitol Hill, I don't know, that's what they worship today. And they offered their sacrifices and presented the provocations of their offering. And I said to them, what does this high place you go to mean? And what is its name, which can be translated his name? What is his name called? Abama? And the Septuagint translates it Abama. And his name is called Abama to this day. That is the verse immediately before the start of the restoration. Okay? Immediately before America, the first nation in the world to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, we had a person on a high hill that people are bowing down to and honoring called Abama. Okay? I just think that's interesting. So what does that word even mean? Okay? What does it mean? There it is in Hebrew. It's a hey, which means behold, a bet. It's his house, and it's the way you read it from the center to the outside. The center is the focus, the outside is the modifiers. Hey, behold, and bet the house, and mem means chaos. Waters are chaos, right? And so what would that say? Behold, the house of chaos, or a house of chaos, Obama. Does that fit? I'm just saying. I'm not making this up. It's just what's in the Bible. You look at the Paleo-Hebrew, and that's what you get. And then immediately after that, next verse, boom, you've got Israel being restored. I don't know. Is it prophecy? I think it is. So this is about the return of Israel. What happened? On November the 29th, 1947, in Resolution 181, the General Assembly of the United Nations voted to form Israel as an independent Jewish state. I remember that date, not the year, but the date, because it actually happened on my birthday, before I was born. On May 14th, 1948, the next year, the last British troops left, and as they left, Israel stood up and proclaimed the state of Israel. And their neighbors, their brothers were so excited, they decided to try to wipe them off the map, and it didn't work out too good for them. The map's still there. 70 years later, 70 fulfillment of a prophetic timeline, President Trump formally recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and vows to move the United States Embassy there. I think it's profound. I think it's profound. Zechariah 12:3 says, and it shall come to pass in that day that I will make Jerusalem a burden stone for all the peoples, all that burden themselves with it. You want to mess with it? You want to mess with it? You want to burden yourself? You want to go against it? Shall be sorely wounded, and all the nations of the earth shall be gathered against it. You know, Israel's going to have to defend itself now on the world stage. It's time for Israel to walk in that completion. The nations are going to have to decide whose side they're on. Are you on Yahweh's side? Are you an enemy to Israel? The next 10 years are going to be significant because the number 8 in 80 is new beginning. So we've gone from completion of this stage. Now for the next 10 years, we're moving in towards something's going to happen that we'll start. And people's like, okay, I don't know. What is it? You know, it's very interesting. It's going to be a fascinating time to watch. The next 10 years in Israel is going to be fascinating to watch, even to participate in. As Israel established the legal right to the Temple Mount, I mean, all of a sudden, at the end of 70 years, why did nobody think of this? I mean, these families have had their family trees all the way back for years and years and years. They know who they are. But all of a sudden now, at the end of 70 years, by the way, nobody seems to have title to the Temple Mount except us. Just saying. You know, it's just interesting. Is it possible, you know, that in the middle of this, that, you know, the nations are going to finally, for whatever, is it over war? I don't know how it happens. It's going to be interesting. I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen. I'm saying fasten your seatbelt. That's what I'm saying. You know, third temple being built. Who knows? But now maybe the world will finally recognize who it is that has returned to their ancient homeland. And Jacob dwelt in the land. That's who Israel is. It's Jacob. It's people that, the man that whose descendants, God said, that's their land. And now in our day, they've come back and they've established themselves. It's like, we're here. And the nation of the world, America, has finally said, yes, we know who you are. And by the way, we know who your son is too. We'll be sharing that with you shortly. Amen? Hallelujah. I think it's significant. It's going to be a neat time coming up. And I'm telling you, people have drooled for 2,000 years and longer, really, to see these prophecies come true. You live in a very, very, very special time in history. And you're going to look back on this. I mean, I remember the 67 war. I was like 5th or 6th grade, and I remember our little paper came in, and it's a picture of Israeli. I'm like, it was like 6-day war. How can you have a war in 6 days? I mean, we've been studying World War I and World War II, and it's like 6-day war. Like, what is that? You know? But prophetic significance, you know? 6 days, flesh, you know, and then spirit. Work, rest, you know? So Yahweh's hand has always been on Israel. It always will be on Israel. So the God of Israel never slumbers or sleeps. And he never takes his eyes off of Jerusalem. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Father. Thank you for your... Father, thank you for your just steadiness, your continuing to have your prophetic hand there, protecting Israel, having your word, your true word, that we know who you are. Thank you for all you're doing, even in our day, Father. And help us to be able to watch, participate, and be in line with you as your word comes true in our day. In Yeshua's name we pray. Thank you, Father. Amen and amen. Shabbat shalom.